Do you believe that love can be as dangerous as any weapon? Many think that true love is the one that consumes, that binds, that never lets go. But this is a deadly illusion that has already destroyed lives and entire families. Imagine discovering that what seemed like passion was actually a lethal trap. And if I told you that by understanding the true nature of healthy love, you could not only protect those you love, but also prevent irreversible tragedies? If this statement sounds absurd, get ready for a shocking and transformative revelation. The clock struck 3 a.m. The darkness of the night spread like a thick veil over the quiet street of a small town in Tennessee. The house at 6802 Carrail Drive was enveloped in a disturbing silence, except for the faint whisper of the wind that seemed to carry something sinister. Inside Emma Walker's room, a 16-year-old girl, the atmosphere exuded the serenity of an ordinary teenager. Posters of her favorite bands adorned the walls, while carefully arranged stuffed animals decorated her bed. Emma slept soundly, unaware of the imminent danger approaching. However, outside, under the cover of darkness, something disturbing was about to happen. A silent figure moved with precision, dressed entirely in black. Each step was carefully calculated, his feet muffled by the damp grass as he approached Emma's bedroom window. Inside that young body, a disturbed mind was plotting a macabre plan. Riley Gall, an ex-boyfriend obsessed and unable to accept the end of the relationship, was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. Emma, in her sleep, did not hear the slight creak of wood as it was pressed by Riley's gloved hand. Her eyes were closed, breathing softly, while her killer lurked by the window. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the night itself knew that something terrible was about to happen. Riley raised the gun, a Glock 9mm that he had stolen from his grandfather, with trembling but determined hands. He knew what he was about to do, but perhaps he didn't fully understand the consequences. Time seemed to stop for a moment as Riley prepared to pull the trigger. He was motivated by a toxic mix of jealousy, anger, and desperation. Emma's voice echoed in his mind, the cruel words she had said when she left him, the refusals to give him another chance. All of this culminated in a tragic decision, where reason had been replaced by a desperate need for control. When the shots were fired, the sound reverberated through the house, breaking the silence of the night. 2 bullets pierced the window, and one of them found its target. The projectile tore through the thin wall and struck Emma in the head. The impact was immediate and fatal. She had no time to wake up, no time to feel fear. In the next instant, everything that was Emma Walker faded away, leaving behind only a lifeless body on the bed that had once been a refuge of dreams. The dark figure that had moved so determinedly now quickly retreated, Riley's heart pounding erratically. He could hardly believe what he had done, but there was no time for regret. He needed to disappear, to erase all traces of his presence as if that night had never happened. However, the weight of his actions would accompany him forever, haunting every thought, every dream, as Emma's life became a distant memory, erased by the darkness Riley had brought into her life. And so, in the stillness of that house, all that remained was the distant echo of gunshots, mingling with the wind that continued to whisper secrets that no one else would hear. Welcome to Spooky Stories. I'm Milo, your guide through the chilling and the unknown. Here, we dive into terrifying tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Join our community of thrill seekers, and let's explore the darkness together. If you're curious about how I keep my concentration, efficiency, performance, and mental health at their peak every day, I'm going to share with you 2 resources that I use daily in my video creation routine. First, breathing for sleep. This method is essential for my deep, restful nights, ensuring I wake up refreshed and ready to create high-quality content. And the best part? super easy to incorporate into your routine. And then there's the 7 seconds at-home ritual. This ritual is backed by 4 neuroscience studies and helps to supercharge my brain power, keeping my focus sharp throughout the entire day. Want to try these resources and feel the difference in your routine? The links are right here in the video description and pinned in the comments. Don't miss this chance to elevate your productivity and mental well-being. The next morning, the Walker household awoke to a day that, at first glance, seemed like any other. The sun was just beginning to rise on the horizon, casting timid rays that gently illuminated Emma's bedroom windows. Jill Walker, Emma's mother, was the first to get up. She followed her usual routine, preparing to wake her daughter, who always liked to wash her hair before school. But something was about to shatter the normalcy of that morning. Jill walked towards Emma's room, still wrapped in the comfort of her daily routine. She opened the door carefully, expecting to find her daughter still asleep, perhaps grumbling a little about having to wake up early. However, as soon as she entered the room, a cold sensation ran down her spine. The atmosphere seemed strangely dense, charged with something she couldn't immediately identify. "Emma," Jill called softly, approaching the bed. There was no response. Jill lightly touched her daughter's leg, as she did every morning. But this time there was not the slightest movement. Her heart began to race, an irrational fear taking hold of her thoughts. She then touched Emma's shoulder, calling her name more urgently. Still no reaction. It was at this moment that Jill noticed something terribly wrong. Emma's body was rigid, her eyes closed, but her face did not seem peaceful. Instead, there was a strange expression, as if she were trapped in a nightmare. Panic took hold of Jill, who began shaking her daughter, trying to wake her up, but it was useless. Emma was cold, motionless. When Jill finally got close enough, she noticed something that made her stomach turn. There was a dark stain on the pillow, something that looked like blood. Jill's scream echoed through the house, a sound of pure anguish that immediately alerted her husband, Mark Walker, who ran to the room. Upon entering, he was met with the most devastating scene of his life. His daughter, his little Emma, was lying on the bed, lifeless, with dried blood around her head. Mark felt his legs give way as Jill, in shock, tried to process what was before her eyes. "Emma, please wake up," Jill pleaded, but deep down she knew her daughter wouldn't respond. The reality was imposing itself in a cruel way. Mark, with trembling hands, tried to find signs of life, but there was no pulse. Everything indicated that Emma had been dead for hours. Desperate, the Walkers called emergency services. Jill's voice trembled as she explained the situation, but even she couldn't believe the words coming out of her mouth. How could this have happened? Who would do something so horrible? While they waited for the police and paramedics to arrive, the house, which had once been a warm and safe home, now seemed like a nightmare scene where terror had infiltrated the most sacred place, their daughter's bedroom. When the paramedics arrived, the confirmation was quick. Emma Walker was dead, the victim of a gunshot wound to the head. Jill collapsed into sobs while Mark, stunned, tried to comprehend what had happened. The police immediately began an investigation, and the Walker home was transformed into a crime scene. There were many questions, but the answers seemed distant. The sound of the police officers' hurried footsteps, the murmur of conversations between investigators, and Jill's uncontrollable sobbing filled the environment. What was supposed to be a normal morning had turned into a nightmare from which the Walkers would never wake up. Emma's room, once a refuge of peace and youth, was now a scene marked by horror, and the mystery of her death began to take shape as the investigation would reveal dark secrets buried deep in a disturbed mind. As the sun rose, illuminating the streets of the quiet town, news of Emma Walker's death quickly spread. The community was shocked to learn that the young girl, so full of life and promise, had been taken in such a brutal manner. Friends, neighbors, and schoolmates couldn't believe that something like this could happen so close to home. But while the grief began to settle in, the police dove deeper into the investigation, trying to understand who could have committed such a heinous crime. At the center of the investigation was a name that repeatedly came up: Riley Gall. He was Emma's ex-boyfriend, an 18-year-old who had been a constant figure in her life for the past few years. However, their relationship was far from healthy. Emma's parents, Jill and Mark, always felt that something was not right with the boy. Riley was possessive, manipulative, and seemed to have an unsettling control over Emma, even after they broke up. The detectives began gathering information about Riley, trying to understand what could have driven him to such an extreme act. His behavior in the days leading up to Emma's death was peculiar, to say the least. Witnesses reported that he had been seen wandering around the neighborhood, dressed all in black, like a sinister shadow lurking in the distance. This, coupled with the fact that he had sent disturbing messages to Emma, desperately trying to win her back, made the detectives focus their attention on him. Riley's messages were confusing and contradictory, oscillating between pleas for love and veiled threats. He seemed to be in a constant state of anguish, unable to accept that Emma had finally decided to end the relationship for good. That fateful week, Riley went even further in his manipulative attempts, faking a kidnapping to get Emma's attention, hoping she would see him as a hero. But the young girl, already tired of his manipulations, began to distance herself for good, blocking him on social media and cutting all ties. This was the final straw for Riley. The ultimate rejection sent him into a spiral of despair and fury. On the night before the crime, he had confided in a friend that he couldn't live without Emma. These words now sounded like a terrible premonition. The detectives knew they needed to act quickly before Riley attempted to flee or cover his tracks. As the investigation progressed, a visit to Riley's grandparents' house revealed a crucial piece of the puzzle. A Glock 9mm, the murder weapon, was missing. Riley had previously mentioned to a friend that he took the gun to protect himself, but the story didn't add up. He had never reported to the police that he was in danger, nor were there any signs that someone was threatening him. It was evident that the gun had been stolen with a dark purpose. That same day, the detectives summoned Riley for questioning. He arrived at the station with an expression of apparent calm, but his eyes betrayed the inner turmoil. During the interrogation, Riley repeatedly denied any involvement in Emma's death. He insisted that he was in his dorm room on the night of the crime, sleeping, and that he only learned of her death in the morning through messages from friends. But inconsistencies in his statement quickly began to emerge. When confronted with the evidence, the friends' accounts, the missing gun, the disturbing texts, Riley began to contradict himself. The pressure from the detectives intensified, and in a moment of desperation, Riley made a statement that shocked everyone in the room. "I shot, but I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted to scare her, to make her come back to me." The confession, though diluted with confused justifications, sealed Riley's fate. The mask of calm he had tried to maintain finally fell, revealing a young man tormented by his own demons, unable to accept rejection, and who, in his desperate attempt to regain control, committed the most irreversible act possible. The detectives, now more certain than ever that they had found the culprit, began preparing the case for trial, knowing that justice for Emma Walker was drawing near. The courtroom was packed on the day Riley Gall was brought to trial. The case had attracted enormous media attention, turning the trial into a grim spectacle. The public was divided between horror at the crime and morbid curiosity about the details that would be revealed. That day, The courtroom walls seemed to absorb the tension that permeated the air, a heavy energy weighing on everyone present. Riley entered the courtroom, handcuffed and with a distant look. He seemed a pale reflection of the young man who had once been a rising football star. Now he was just a defendant, involved in one of the most brutal crimes the town had ever witnessed. With each step he took, the sound of his chains echoed, a constant reminder of his impending imprisonment, both physical and emotional. The prosecutor began presenting the case to the jury with a grave tone, describing Emma's death as a premeditated act of violence, motivated by obsession and control. He highlighted Riley's manipulative behavior throughout the relationship, showing how he engaged in increasingly desperate actions to keep Emma under his control. The central point of the prosecution was clear. Riley had planned and executed Emma Walker's murder in a cold and calculated manner. The evidence presented was devastating. The text messages exchanged between Riley and Emma in the days leading up to the crime showed a disturbing pattern of emotional manipulation and veiled threats. In one of the messages, Riley stated that he couldn't live without her, and that he'd rather die than see her with someone else. These words, read aloud in the courtroom, had a profound impact on the jurors, who saw there the evidence of a disturbed young man, consumed by his obsession. Riley's friends were called to testify, and each of them helped paint an even darker picture. They recounted Riley's erratic behavior, his desperate attempts to win Emma back, and most incriminating of all, the story of the fake kidnapping. When questioned about the night of the crime, Riley's friends, visibly shaken, revealed that he had tried to involve them in a plan to get rid of the gun, an act that could only be interpreted as an attempt to cover up his crime. However, it was the testimony of Jill and Mark Walker that most touched the hearts of everyone in the courtroom. Jill, with a choked voice and tears in her eyes, described the horror of finding her daughter dead, the dried blood on the pillow, the absence of any sign of life. She spoke about how Emma was a vibrant girl, full of dreams, and how Riley had slowly destroyed her joy, controlling every aspect of her life until he finally took it from her in the most definitive way. Mark, for his part, spoke with contained anger, looking directly at Riley. He described how he had sensed from the beginning that something was wrong with the young man, how he had tried to keep Emma away from him, but how she, young and naive, always believed in the lies and manipulations Riley spun. "He killed our daughter," Mark said in a tone that silenced the entire courtroom. "And it wasn't just that night. He killed her little by little with his lies, his threats, his control. And in the end, he took her life in the cruelest way possible. When it was the defense's turn, the strategy was to plead temporary insanity." Riley's attorney tried to argue that he was not in full control of his mental faculties when he committed the crime, that the young man was in an extreme state of despair and never actually planned to kill Emma. However, this line of defense seemed weak in the face of the overwhelming evidence. The high point of the trial came when the secret recording, made by Riley's friends at the police's request, was presented to the jury. In the recording, Riley discussed how to get rid of the gun and instructed his friends on what to tell the police. His words betrayed a coldness that completely contradicted the image of a confused and desperate young man that the defense was trying to paint. In that recording, Riley was not a remorseful teenager. He was a killer trying to escape justice. When the prosecutor made his final argument, the courtroom was silent. Emma Walker trusted Riley Gall. She believed he loved her. But what she got in return was a cruel betrayal, a life cut short prematurely. What Riley did was not a mistake. It was not an accident. It was cold-blooded murder. And for that, he must be held accountable. The jury, after deliberating for a few hours, returned with the verdict. The room was heavy with tension as the judge asked for the verdict to be read. "Guilty of first-degree murder." The words fell like a weight on Riley, who lowered his head, expressionless. For the walkers, there was no sense of victory, only a dark relief that, at least, justice would be served. The trial was over, but the nightmare for all involved was far from over. The memory of Emma Walker would remain alive, a young girl full of life whose light was extinguished by someone who claimed to love her. And for Riley Gall, the rest of his life would be spent in the shadows, paying for the monstrous act he had committed. The court had delivered its sentence, and Riley Gall was condemned to spend the rest of his days in prison. But even with the verdict, the weight of the crime continued to hang over everyone involved. For the Walkers, there was no solace in the justice obtained. The loss of their daughter was a black hole of pain that consumed all their energy. As they tried to move forward, every corner of the house reminded them of Emma's absence, and the void left by her death was unbearable. Inside the prison, Riley Gall also faced his own demons. The reality of his new life behind bars began to set in, and the cold walls of his cell were a constant reminder of the chain of wrong decisions that had led him there. On lonely nights, when the prison's silence was interrupted only by the distant noises of other inmates, Riley found himself confronted with the magnitude of his actions. The obsession he had confused with love was, in fact, a deadly trap that he himself had created. In the first months of his sentence, Riley tried to maintain a facade of indifference, refusing to acknowledge the gravity of what he had done. However, as time passed, the memories of Emma and the life he had destroyed began to haunt him. He saw her in his dreams, not as the scared girl he controlled, but as the vibrant young woman who once believed in his promises. In his dreams, Emma did not look at him with fear, but with deep sadness, as if she pitied him, as if she saw the tragedy of a young man who had thrown his life away because of a sick passion. These dreams became more frequent, disturbing his sleep, making him wake up sweating and with a racing heart. During the day, he tried to distract himself with prison tasks, but his mind never stopped remembering. The words from the trial echoed in his head, the testimonies from friends, from Emma's parents, the final verdict. Every detail came back to haunt him, turning his cell into a private hell. Riley began to withdraw, avoiding contact with other inmates and spending most of his time in his cell. He found himself reliving that fateful night countless times, trying to understand how he had come to the point of taking a life. The excuse he had given, that he just wanted to scare her, now seemed empty and ridiculous. He knew deep down that the gun should never have been fired, that simply being there, in the middle of the night, armed, was already a clear sign that he had crossed the line long before pulling the trigger. Meanwhile, outside, life went on. Emma's friends tried to return to normalcy, although the void left by her absence was palpable in every meeting, every school event she should have attended. The school where Emma studied dedicated a memorial to her, a space where friends and classmates could remember her fondly, share stories, and keep alive the memory of a young girl whose life was tragically cut short. Emma's parents, Jill and Mark, were determined to ensure that their daughter's death was not in vain. They became involved in awareness campaigns about abusive relationships, using Emma's story to warn other families about the warning signs that often go unnoticed. Jill, especially, dedicated herself to speaking at schools and communities, hoping to prevent other young girls from falling into the same trap that ensnared her daughter. But despite all the effort to turn pain into something constructive, grief was a constant presence. Mark often found himself recalling happy moments with Emma, like the afternoons when she practiced her cheerleading routines in the backyard, or the deep conversations they had about her dreams for the future. These memories were both painful and precious, fragments of a life he would never have back. As the years passed, the wound left by Emma's death did not heal, but the Walkers learned to live with the pain, carrying it as a burden that would never be fully alleviated. They found comfort in the legacy Emma left behind, in the influence her story had on the lives of others. And as they continued their lives as best they could, they knew that Emma, in some way, was always present, not as a victim, but as a living reminder that true love does not control, does not imprison, but liberates. For Riley, the years in prison were a long and painful process of confronting himself. He finally admitted in a letter sent to the Walkers years later that he had failed in every possible way as a boyfriend, as a human being. In the letter, he did not ask for forgiveness, knowing that it would be impossible, but he expressed his deep regret for what he had done, an attempt to bring some kind of peace to the family he had devastated. The letter never brought the closure that Riley hoped for, but for the Walkers, it served as a confirmation of what they had always known, that Emma was not the victim of a crime of passion, but of an act of pure possessiveness and control. And while Riley continued his life behind bars, the Walkers went on with their lives, always remembering Emma not for what happened to her, but for what she meant, a light in their lives that would never be extinguished. The years passed, but the memory of Emma Walker remained alive, etched in the hearts of all who knew her. Her death, though tragic, became a catalyst for profound changes in how society viewed abusive relationships, especially among young people. The lectures that Jill Walker began giving in schools and communities grew in reach, transforming her into a national figure in the fight against emotional abuse and coercive control. Jill, in her lectures, always started with a picture of Emma smiling. "This is my daughter," she would say, her voice strong but filled with emotion. Emma was full of life, full of dreams, but she fell in love with someone who loved her in a sick way, someone who believed that if he couldn't have her, no one else could. In each lecture, Jill recounted Emma's story with vivid details, from the beginning of her relationship with Riley to the devastating moment when she found her daughter lifeless. The rooms would fall silent, the audience absorbing every word, often with tears in their eyes. These presentations not only raised awareness but also inspired action. In various schools and communities, programs were implemented to teach young people about the warning signs of abusive relationships. Teachers and counselors began receiving training to identify troubling behaviors and offer support to students in similar situations. Emma's story saved lives, prevented tragedies, and this gave the Walkers a sense of purpose amid the pain. Mark Walker, for his part, found solace in writing. He began writing a book about Emma's life, a blend of memories and lessons, with the goal of keeping his daughter's essence alive while helping other families avoid the same fate. The book, titled Light in the Darkness, the story of Emma Walker, became a bestseller, touching hearts and minds across the country. In it, Mark described not only the pain of loss but also the joy that Emma brought to everyone around her, her passion for life, and her indomitable spirit. Meanwhile, within the cold walls of the prison, Riley Gall lived an existence marked by remorse and loneliness. He had become an exemplary prisoner, staying out of trouble and dedicating his time to reflection and reading. The years spent in forced isolation changed him in ways he never imagined. The arrogance and sense of entitlement he once had were gone, replaced by a painful self-awareness. Riley wrote letters regularly, not only to the Walkers but also to other young people in situations similar to the one he had created. These letters were his way of trying to make amends for the harm he had caused, warning others about the dangers of control and obsession. Although he knew nothing could bring Emma back, he hoped that, at least, he could prevent other tragedies. One day, Riley received an unexpected visit from an old friend, Alex McCarty, who had distanced himself from him shortly after the crime. Alex hesitated when he saw him, the memories of that dark time still weighing on him, but he felt the need to see Riley face to face, to understand if there was any trace of the friend he once knew before everything fell apart. When the two sat down in the visiting room, the initial silence was broken by Riley's soft voice. "Thank you for coming," Riley said, with a sad but sincere look. "I didn't expect to see you again." Alex took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I needed to understand, Riley. I needed to know if you really regret it." Riley looked down, his eyes fixed on his intertwined hands. "Every day I spend here is a reminder of what I did, Alex. I killed the person I loved most, and I destroyed many other lives in the process. Not a day goes by that I don't wish I could go back and change everything." Alex slowly nodded, absorbing the sincerity in Riley's words. "I wanted to believe that, Riley. I wanted to believe you've changed, that you understand what you did. I understand now, but it's too late for Emma, too late for everyone," Riley replied, his voice heavy with regret. "All I can do now is try to prevent others from making the same mistakes." The conversation between the two continued for a few more hours, and when Alex finally left the prison, he felt a mix of emotions. There was a small sense of relief, a hope that, even in such a dark place, Riley had found a glimpse of redemption. But that did not erase the fact that Emma's life had been brutally cut short, an irreparable loss that he, like everyone who knew her, would carry forever. For the community, Emma Walker became a symbol of resilience and a warning against the dangers of abusive relationships. Annually, on the date of her death, schools and organizations held events in her memory, reinforcing the importance of protecting young people and educating them about what is, and what is not, love. And so, even as the years went by, Emma's legacy continued to shine, an eternal light in the darkness. She was not remembered only for the tragic way she died, but for the joy and hope she brought to everyone who knew her. Her story became a lesson about the power of true love, the kind of love that frees, that strengthens, and that never imprisons. The love Emma deserved but was cruelly denied by someone who, in his obsession, confused possession with affection. The Walkers, though marked by tragedy, found strength in the community that supported them, in the lives that Emma continued to touch even after her passing, and in the certainty that, somewhere, their daughter's light still shone brightly, guiding others out of the darkness. Now that you know the dark side that love can hide, how do you intend to apply this knowledge in your own life? Are you willing to question the relationships around you, to identify the signs of control disguised as affection, and to act before it's too late? Or will you continue to ignore the danger, believing that this will never happen to me? The choice is yours, but remember, recognizing and confronting these truths can save not only your life, but also the lives of those you love. And if you want to keep exploring topics like this, learning to protect yourself and others, subscribe to the Spooky Stories channel and turn on notifications. Here, we uncover the darkest secrets so that you're never caught off guard. Are you ready for this journey? Now that you understand the dark side that can lurk behind the quest for fame and validation on social media, it's time to reflect. Are you prepared to face the consequences of your online actions? Do you really know who is on the other side of the screen? Or are you just being lulled into a false sense of security and control? The truth is, in the digital age, the line between admirer and predator can be thinner than you think. So, how will you protect your privacy and safety moving forward? And more importantly, how will you use this knowledge to navigate the vast online world more consciously and safely? If you want to keep learning about the hidden dangers lurking in the shadows of online life and understand how to protect yourself, subscribe now to the Spooky Stories channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any new stories and can continue deepening your knowledge on topics that could literally save your life. Let's journey together towards a safer and more informed life. Are you ready for this change?